going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. I wanted to do a quick pivot from all the NFL draft content, talk a little bit about the Steelers offensive coordinator search. We've got some names coming about, that they've been interested in. They've done a few interviews now that they've announced. So, wanted to kind of talk about those guys individually, some of the interesting talking points, pros, cons, all those different things. So, feel like it's probably pertinent to talk about Arthur Smith. That came out, I believe, yesterday. Former Falcons head coach. Before that, he was the offensive coordinator in Tennessee for a couple of years. Derrick Henry, Ryan Tannehill. This is one of the names that I feel like isn't overly surprising, but he's definitely the most like popular or probably well-known name that they've interviewed so far. But just some general thoughts on Arthur Smith. Mike Tomlin after the season said that he was looking for somebody with NFL play calling experience. Smith obviously has that. If you just look at his resume, not only does he have some legitimate play calling experience, he also has play calling experience where the offenses were actually pretty good. If you go back to like his time in Tennessee, and I think it was 2019, 2020, the Titans offense was, they had some really good players, obviously prime Derrick Henry. They had A.J. Brown, really young at that point in time, but the Titans offense is pretty good. They were second in success rate and fourth in EPA per play during those 2 years, which kind of made Smith a really hot head coaching candidate. Things didn't work out in Atlanta for a myriad of different reasons, but I wanted to kind of talk about a little bit about in depth on him because he has the most kind of resume to kind of discuss. But some of the things that he likes, he utilizes a lot of heavy personnel. So if you just look at some of the Falcons numbers from last year, it's a lot of 12, 13, 21 personnel. All those are top 3, top 5 in terms of usage rating in the National Football League. That's definitely something that he prioritizes. Smith is a believer in using like motion at the snap, shifts, pre-snap. They do a decent amount of play action as well. He's had some years where they've even been like his offenses have even been top 5 in play action usage. A lot of that play action stuff is, shot play oriented, trying to get plays either over the middle of the field on like deep crossers, dig routes, things like that, or to take shots down the field with using max protection. I do think, generally speaking, his offense makes things easier on the quarterback and the tackles, just with the use of play action and some of the easy buttons. His offense, like I said, a lot of those max protection plays, it's really just like 1 to 2. And making the read pretty simple, where you just pretty much have to point and shoot. Now, so all those things I talked about, the increased play action, quarterback having experience working with that, leading good offenses, the personnel, all that stuff, I think is generally positive stuff that Steelers fans have been talking about for a really long time in terms of what they want. Wanted to talk a little bit about some of the downsides, I think, from the potential Smith hire. Bad news is like his run game is really the opposite of what like we saw from the Steelers last year, especially what they lean into after the bye. Smith's run game can be predictable. It's a lot of like outside zone, wide zone, and they just like he's exclusively zone. Like that's all he does, and that's really all he's ever done. If you just look at some of the rates of like zone versus gap. They ran gap run schemes last year on 17% of their offensive run plays. That was 32nd in the league. They've been dead last over the last 3 years in gap power schemes. So a lot of that stuff that the Steelers kind of implemented after the bye in terms of, running more dart, power, pulling guards, getting more downhill, a lot of the things that I feel like kind of gave the Steelers a little bit of a identity on offense. Smith just does not. That's not his vibe. He wants to be outside zone. Very zone heavy. That's just what he believes in. He targets offensive linemen specifically for his scheme. So how does that get married? Are the Steelers going to move towards a more zone run scheme? The first thing I think there is you have to have the personnel to do it. Right now they don't. Of course, it's January 29th or whatever, so there's plenty of time to figure that out. But a big investment at center will be needed. You have to have really athletic guys. A really athletic center can do a lot of good things in terms of maximizing a zone run blocking scheme, excuse me. So, can you get the personnel for that? Is that the direction that they want to go in? Because like I said, he's got 5 years of play calling experience, and this is just what he's done. This is what he knows, what he's most comfortable with. I do think that there are times where, like I said, he can get predictable. And the reason I say that is because, a lot of the NFL since kind of the Shanahan McVay, offenses have blown up and everybody's been picking from those trees. There are more teams that have gotten really good, like that got so good at running the wide zone stuff that NFL defenses started to catch up. So you started to see them adjust with lighter bodies on the field, playing with two high safety structures, 5-man fronts, a lot of the things that kind of counter the outside zone stuff. That's why you've seen a lot of, like, for example, Shanahan and McVay specifically kind of shift back and do a lot more power stuff because it's kind of like a zig while they zag type of thing. And I just don't think that Smith has really quite adjusted to that stuff yet. And it'd be interesting to see. Not that you can't formulate. I mean, zone's still the most popular thing. Not that you can't formulate a good offense out of it. It's just it's not what a lot of other play callers that are really good are doing right now. Um, but just some of the other thoughts too. I mean, everybody knows about the fantasy football discussion about the usage of Drake London, Kyle Pitts, even Bijan Robinson, who still had a fantastic rookie season. That was just a big complaint and one of his ultimate downfalls. They kind of overachieved, I feel like, last year on offense, and then they probably underachieved this year. There's definitely some quarterback, you know, context there. They have had poor quarterback play the last couple of years. Now, there's a chance that that could also happen in Pittsburgh, right? Like the Steelers have also had poor quarterback play over the past 2 years. So adjusting to that, and I think the NFL is about matchups. If you are a subscriber for the channel, you all know like how often I talk about that. Um, NFL is a matchup league. If you can't get the best players or scheme to get your best players in football, that's a problem. I mean, that's like should be like a prerequisite for an offensive coordinator, offensive play caller. And Smith, just generally speaking, did not do a good enough job of that. And I feel like that was a big reason that the Falcons moved on. And then just the drop back passing game. I want to dive more deeper into that before I really give a firm take. But I've never, just in watching Smith's offenses, live viewings, and then studying them whenever they would play the Steelers, I've never been very impressed with like the drop back passing game stuff. So when you talk about developing a quarterback, I do think his offense provides really good guardrails to maximize a quarterback, but I don't know if the drop back passing game has enough juice that I would say like a quarterback's really going to get extremely developed over the course of time. But like I said, I want to really do some study in there to kind of, make sure that I'm giving the right take, or, I could pull that back. But overall, though, like I think Smith, qualified offensive coordinator candidate, obviously, like I said, having that previous success is something that, a lot of their recent coordinator hires just haven't had. He wouldn't be my first choice, but I also think that there's a very good chance that this could work. If they give him the right personnel, you get acceptable quarterback play. I do think that Smith could lead you in a good direction as long as the philosophy and everybody's on the same page. They're going to have to get that stuff figured out if he's the hire. Another good thing I think with Smith is because the Atlanta tenure ended so poorly, I feel like I don't see him as a guy just from a personality standpoint and from just the way that he's talked about in league circles that's going to get another head coaching job look very soon. Like maybe if he comes, like say if he were to come to Pittsburgh, does a fantastic job over the next 2 years, could he get another shot? Absolutely. I don't think he's going to be one of like the top candidates. So like if you do hire him, even if he does, let's just say he does a good or solid job, there's a good chance that you can keep him for a couple of years. And when you're a defensive head coach like Tomlin is, who has that type of background, doesn't call plays on offense, finding offensive coordinator stability is really difficult. You look around the league, every NFL team, I think, has now changed their offensive coordinator since 2022. It's just hard to keep guys around because if they're really good, they normally get head coaching jobs, and that's just how the ball rolls. So there's some probably hidden benefit, honestly, to a guy like Smith in that role. I want to talk a little bit about just some of the other candidates that they've been interested in. Gerard Johnson, quarterbacks coach for the Texans. He's kind of had a quick rise throughout the coaching ranks. I think he started coaching about 5-6 years ago. He's a former player, actually had a cup of coffee with the Steelers back in the early 2010s, I want to say. I don't think he actually appeared in any games, but he did play a little bit in the preseason. But really his background, he was the assistant quarterbacks coach in Minnesota in 2022. So he worked with Kevin O'Connell. O'Connell, obviously a Sean McVay disciple. So there's some connections there. And then he goes to be the quarterbacks coach in 2023 with Bobby Slowick in Houston. Of course, CJ Stroud coming off a monstrous year. Kirk Cousins even the year before monstrous year. So pretty good resume there. You got a young quarterback. He used to play quarterback at Texas A&M, I believe. So he's got the playing experience. He's worked 2 seasons really as a quarterback's guy, and both those quarterbacks played extremely well. Now, also the ties to McVay, ties to the Shanahan offense, which is those two systems he was coming from. I do think that that's obviously something that Steelers are remotely interested in. There was some reported interest of a guy like Zach Robinson, who's been with McVay. They didn't end up getting the chance to interview him because when Raheem Morris went to Atlanta, he took him with him. They were familiar with each other from their time in LA. But there's definitely some intrigue, I think, with the Steelers in trying to poach from that tree. I mean, them and pretty much every other team in the NFL are trying to get what those type of offenses have been able to do over the past decade now or whatever. So, but Gerard Johnson, the only thing is like he doesn't have play caller experience, obviously. So, is that one of those things where you are interviewing him as a potential guy that you want to bring over as like a maybe assistant head coach or pass game coordinator type of title to work with the quarterbacks as well, like trying to give him a little bit of a raise or more responsibility, anything like that? Maybe he's a guy that you pair with a guy like Smith in terms of just, that's kind of what they did with the GM search, right? Like they went and they, interviewed all these guys, Brennan Hunt, Omar Khan, Andy Weidel, and then they promote Khan, but they bring Weidel over as, a different title. So this is something that they could do here for sure. Of course, we only know of 3 candidates. The other guy that they've reportedly interviewed has been Thomas Brown. Brown has an interesting kind of background as well. He does actually have play calling experience, but it's only been for a year. And it's really hard to take anything from 2023 from Brown because he was the offensive coordinator with Frank Reich this season. They went like back and forth on who was calling plays. Like it was mostly Reich, and then they went to Brown, and then Reich took it back, and then they fired Reich. Everything in Carolina right now, just full stop, is a complete disaster. The ownership, the organization, it's just a dumpster fire. So I don't think you can really take, Carolina was terrible on offense, but that's not an indictment of Brown or what he could potentially be down the line. It's just a bad situation, all around. Until Carolina proves otherwise, it's a dumpster fire organization in my book. But just previously before that, Brown, a lot of work with running backs, both in college. He's a former running back from Georgia, I believe. But he worked with the running backs with the Rams starting in 2020. And then he got the assistant head coach title under McVay and worked with tight ends as well in the couple of years that he was there. So, again, I think there's some familiar kind of ties of what type of offense they're looking for here with the McVay tree. Some of the Shanahan stuff is probably intriguing to them as well. Now, would Brown be a guy that they would be wanting to bring over in terms of maybe like a quarterback coach, a run game coordinator? Is this another guy that they could try to bring onto the staff that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to get the offensive coordinator job, but more about maybe just trying to fill out a staff for a guy that they have in mind for, the top position? I'm not really sure. I think it's worth discussing. But Brown, another young guy, 37 years old, with a little bit of experience. But before he took that Panthers job, he was very well regarded in the NFL landscapes. I remember listening to like podcasts over the summer, and there was a lot of people excited about the possibility of him being a really good offensive coordinator. So don't freak out over the Panthers thing. It's just not worth, we don't really know much about him as far as I'm concerned. Just some other things I think are worth talking about. With the Super Bowl now confirmed, Chiefs, Niners, there definitely could be some interest. I hope that there is with Clint Kubiak from the Niners coaching staff. Of course, you can't hold in-person interviews with guys that are still coaching right now. And that's kind of the hang up. It's at least going to be 2 more weeks until you're going to be able to sit down and like have an in-person conversation with him. They could do virtual interviews. There are still a handful of NFL teams out there that are looking for offensive coordinators. So there's a lot of stuff that's, still to be hammered out, but I would anticipate them having some type of interest in Kubiak if they wait another 2 weeks to, make a decision. And that like you guys that follow me on Twitter, y'all probably remember, like I've talked about Kubiak a good amount in the past, but, NFL ties, son of Gary Kubiak, longtime offensive guru around the NFL. Just working with that San Francisco offense. He's not the play caller. Shanahan is, but he does have play calling experience. He was the offensive coordinator back in Minnesota in 2021. Their offense that year was, I think, middle of the pack. But he does have a little bit of play calling experience, which is at least something that Tomlin specifically talked about him wanting. The Niners, what they've done with Brock Purdy, I think is definitely something that he has some type of development in. Of course, Shanahan's going to get the credit for that, and I definitely agree with him. Being one of the best in the business for sure. But again, Shanahan ties. I think just some of the quarterbacks that he's worked with in that kind of system, work with Kirk Cousins. A lot of the things that I said earlier about just things Steelers fans I think want to see out of the offense in terms of play action, throwing the ball in the middle of the field, stuff like that. Kubiak has a lot of experience working in systems that prioritize that. So he would be another guy that I think that they will have interest in if the spot is still open in the next 2 weeks. Something tells me that this is probably going to go one or two ways. Arthur Smith, I don't know that he's actually had any other reported interest this cycle for one reason or another. This could go like pretty quickly where like they interview him yesterday. They really like what they saw and boom, he's the offensive coordinator. Or, they could keep things open for 2 weeks. If they keep things open for 2 weeks, I definitely think Kubiak will get an interview. I'm sure there will be other teams if there are still other openings that would like to interview him as well. Brian Greasy's another name that people have mentioned. Greasy's the quarterback's coach in San Francisco. Kubiak, I think, is the pass game coordinator. But Greasy, obviously a longtime NFL veteran quarterback, has done a lot of work, with the Niners over the past several years, working with the quarterbacks there. And then I think before that, Greasy was training quarterbacks like for the draft and doing some stuff like that. So a lot of work with quarterbacks there too. So, but yeah, I didn't anticipate making this long of a video, but apparently I had more thoughts on the offensive coordinator search than I initially thought. But let me know what you guys think about who y'all would want to see in terms of who y'all would like to see them interview, who y'all would like to see them promote to the offensive coordinator spot. I said earlier in the offseason, I really believe that this is the most important hire that Mike Tomlin's made in his Steelers tenure, just because you look at the playoff drought, them trying to get out of this kind of middle ground like purgatory that they're currently in. The easiest way to do that, they're gonna have to nail this offensive coordinator hire. I mean, they've been so bad on offense for so long now. They got to get this thing fixed, and I think first things first, you got to find the right guy to lead it, and that starts at the top. So I'm very interested to see what they end up doing. I think that the wide net that they are casting. I mean, even there was some reported interest in freaking Cliff Kingsbury. That was not one that made much sense to me, and I don't think that that's actually going to come to fruition. Nobody else has kind of reported that except I think Peter King. But they're casting a wide net. I'm okay with them taking their time, especially because the top candidate in my book was Shane Waldron. Done a really good work with Seattle over the past couple of years. He ended up going to Chicago really right as the Steelers search was really beginning after they got bounced in the playoffs. So after he was kind of off the board, I was pretty okay with them, casting a wide net, taking their time, making sure they get this hire right more than anything else. So, but yeah, appreciate you guys watching as always. There are a couple NFL draft film rooms up. Tons of NFL draft related content up on SteelersNow.com. So please make sure that you check that out as well. And then I will try to get at least one more film room done in the next couple of days for you guys. But yeah, appreciate you guys. Have a good rest of your week. Peace and love.